Is it permissible to read books like The Exorcist or watch those type of horror movies? I know Father Jenkins once recommended the movie about Analisa Mel. That's The Exorcism of Emily Rose, I think was the title given to the actual movie. Just curious if it is permissible to watch similar movies like The Exorcist or books like Begone Satan, which was about a case of demonic possession in Iowa back in the 1920s. Well, let's take a look at that. Is it permissible to read books like The Exorcist or watch those type of horror movies? Is it permissible in the sense that is it sinful? If it's an occasion of sin, it would be. I would heartily discourage one from seeing such movies or reading such books because they give a false narrative. They give a false story. They depict exorcism in a way that is completely, well, yes, I guess I could say completely fairy tale-ish. Unfortunately, I think often the way these horror stories play out is they glorify the power of evil and magnify the power of evil, terrifying people at the prospect of meeting some demonic powers and so on, as though the power of God was wanting or lacking here and unable to control the power of the devil. I consider that to be very wrong and very dangerous. So I would certainly discourage people from reading such books just for the sake of the adrenaline rush of being scared to death by these things, because they can come away from them with a very, very false idea, an exaggerated idea of the power of the devil, and actually lose confidence in the power of God because of the way these things are falsely presented. So I think horror movies are a manifestation of original sin, the consequences of original sin in the soul, that people find these things so fascinating. And today we find the glorification of the weird, the bizarre, the twisted, the distorted, the unnatural, the deviant. We glorify these things now. And I think it all comes from the same source of fascination with, well, just the horror of it all, of evil. Evil can be very fascinating to us, as it was under the guise of a temptation to Eve long ago. So it is with us today. We need to avoid that. The author says, I know Father once recommended the movie about Analisa Mel. Well, I recommended that movie, again, marketed under the title of The Exorcism of Emily Rose, because, well, it was, number one, referring to an actual case. And although it had its deficiencies, certainly, it did show the spiritual side. It did show ultimately the power of heaven over the powers of hell. Even the Blessed Mother, and the fact that this soul, her actual name was Analisa Mel. I think she lived in Alsace-Lorraine, if I'm not mistaken, that she did undergo possession, but her possession was a trial from God and as a victim soul, and that she was ultimately given the choice to let the possession end. Maybe she would have died then and saved her soul, or that she would continue suffering as she was for the benefit of the church, which itself was suffering at that time. Remember now, if you never knew this, Analisa Mel actually was a living human being, a young lady who lived at the time when the changes were coming in after Vatican II. I mean, she was living in the, I guess, early 70s. And the changes were coming in after Vatican II, and the church was suffering, basically being poisoned by the venom of modernism. Her family was a traditional Catholic family. It was holding on to the traditional Mass and traditional sacraments. And the understanding conveyed in the movie, but also by the books written on the subject by those who were close to the case, that she was a victim soul suffering for the church and with the church at that time, being poisoned by modernism, by the new order. She was given the choice to continue that suffering for the church and with the church, or to end it. And she chose to continue it, generously being willing to continue that suffering for the good of the church. And it was the Blessed Mother who presented her that choice. Again, if you read the book on the subject of that possession, and you see the movie, I think you see that the spiritual aspect of this was conveyed in the movie. and that there was nothing not only un-Catholic about it, but that it actually conveyed many of the salient aspects of exorcism. One would do well to read the book by Father Gabriel Amort, the exorcist of Rome, died at an advanced age a few years ago. But he wrote a book called An Exorcist Tells His Story. And what Father Amorth tells you in that brief book about exorcism and his own experience actually coincides with the traditional Roman ritual and its 21 instructions to exorcists before, the beginning of chapter 11 of the ritual on exorcisms. I think, again, the story of Analisa Mel in the book, and to some extent in the movie, actually reflects that actual instruction. That the exorcist, I think the man who played the exorcist in the movie, the priest, there were actually two involved in real life, but in the movie there was just one. But it was portrayed fairly accurately insofar as the steps he took in the exorcism were rather accurate. For example, he started out with the exorcism commanding the possessing demons to identify themselves, to give their names. That's one of the first things the exorcist is instructed to do in the Roman ritual, to command the demons to give their names and identify themselves, because that establishes the fact that the exorcist has a power and authority over them that they have to recognize, that they can't resist. And as you recall, if you saw the movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, you recall there were some pretty bad demons who were possessing this poor soul. I think Judas was one. There were a number of other names that escape me right now, but these were rather prominent among the demons. In a sense, it makes sense if one sees this victim's soul as suffering for the church, why these particular demons would be involved. One thing I would very much fault the movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, was it showed in the movie one attempt at exorcism, and it did not succeed in driving out the demons. And it was as though, we failed. There's nothing more we can do. Anybody who knows anything about exorcisms knows that they do not make one attempt and then give up and walk away. They keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. They will not give up. And the demons know when the time comes when they will be expelled. They know that. But they will not give up because they are there to resist and to make that person suffer, as the demons themselves have said. So in any case, that particular movie, I did say that wouldn't be bad to see if you had some background in it and were a balanced individual and could see it from the spiritual message there. If you're just looking for horror, then it'll give you nightmares. Again, I hope that kind of addresses the question. Now, reading the book, Begone Satan, insofar as it is an accurate record of exorcisms, again, it somewhat depends upon the individual. I don't recommend that anybody watch Hollywoodized, romanticized accounts of diabolical possession because, as I say, I think it minimizes the power of God and maximizes the power of Satan. And so it falsifies the whole idea. But even when one is reading or watching an account of a real exorcism that is portrayed in a real way, again, I think it depends on the individual, whether one has the maturity, mostly the mental and spiritual maturity to watch it and to derive good from it, or simply to be horrified by it, frightened by it, terrified by it, and discouraged by it. If one is of a mental state that would be injured by watching it, even if it is an accurate account of a successful exorcism by a real Catholic exorcist, and the devil is eventually vanquished and driven out, if the person watching that is going to be spiritually traumatized by it, then he shouldn't watch it, shouldn't read it. So there are those who could read the book Begone Satan to their advantage, and there are others who could read it almost with a kind of a teenage fascination and be damaged by it. So I can recommend it to everyone.